Hello, everybody. Hello. Good evening, and thank you very much for braving the Galway weather, lashing rain on a Friday evening, and you're very resilient to come out. And so thank you very much for coming this evening. I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of the university and the school, and in particular to welcome Justice Theron, who is our annual distinguished speaker this year. And this is our 9th annual distinguished lecture. Previous speakers include Justice Sheehy-Skeffington of the European Court of Human Rights, Professor Christopher McCrudden of Oxford University, and of course Baroness Hale of the UK Supreme Court. And we're really very much delighted to have Justice Theron with us here this evening. Really a very, very distinguished jurist, a very distinguished speaker, and we're really delighted that you made the long journey to be with us here. We're delighted this year with the annual Distinguished Lecture in Law to partner with the University Women's Network to have this Sheehy-Skeffington lecture as well. So we're really delighted to have that partnership this year, particularly given the theme of Justice Theron's lecture. I'm going to share a little bit of information for those of you that might be new to the university about the university and the School of Law. So founded in 1845, we took our first intake of students here, 68 students, on the 30th of October in 1849. And law has been taught here at NUI Galway since 1849. This is our 170th anniversary of legal scholarship and legal education here at NUI Galway. So the School of Law here at NUI Galway delivers innovative legal education in a dynamic school dedicated to impactful, high-quality legal research. We have over 800 undergraduate, postgraduate and research students in total in the school. We have over 40 academic staff, and we have a range of undergraduate and postgraduate programmes and exciting opportunities for clinical legal education for our students. In the School of Law, we really emphasise student-focused, research-led teaching delivered in a supportive but yet intellectually challenging environment. We are currently the Law School of the Year, and last year the university was the University of the Year in Ireland, so we have a proud tradition and we're ranked quite well in the university rankings. The School of Law hosts 2 research centres, the Irish Centre for Human Rights and the Centre for Disability Law and Policy. Both centres have established reputations as world leaders in their fields. The school is passionate about our research and research that meets the highest standards of scholarship, informs student learning, and engages with current societal challenges impacting public debate and informing policy both nationally and internationally. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague, Dr. Siobhan Quinlivan, who's Vice Dean for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion in the College of Business, Public Policy and Law. I want to thank Siobhan in particular for all the work she's done in organising the annual Distinguished Lecture this year in conjunction with the University Women's Network. And I'd also like to thank my colleagues in the School of Law, Lorna Cormacan, Carmel Flynn, Tara Elwood and Regina Doyle for all of the support they've given in organising this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and as I said, to both reiterate what Charles said, thank you for coming out on a very wet Friday night. It's not easy, we understand. This is, as Charles said, our 9th annual Distinguished Lecture, and we're absolutely delighted to have Justice Theron here from the Constitutional Court in South Africa. And equally, Charles has mentioned that some of the previous speakers, which included, just I suppose to pick out one, the most notable at the moment, Baroness Brenda Hale, who from the UK Supreme Court, who handed down the judgment this week, that a unanimous 11-judge decision that the proroguing of the UK Parliament was unlawful. So we're looking forward to your judgments in the years to come as well, Justice Theron. So the law school has, as Charles mentioned, a long and proud history of researching, supporting and being human rights activists. This work is wide and varied, and I don't intend to kind of go into all of it. But just to give me, I couldn't cover it all in a few minutes in any event, but I would like to acknowledge some of the work. We have world-leading research carried out by our colleagues in the Irish Centre for Human Rights, the Centre for Disability Law and Policy, and the Centre for Housing Law. Their work influences policy and laws at a national, regional, and international level. But it's also important to acknowledge the work of individual researchers within the School of Law as well, and that includes groundbreaking research on the Me Too movement, surrogacy rights, equality, policing and criminal justice, refugee rights, bullying in the law, and the ethical, legal and social implications of new technologies, as well as mental health law, children's rights law and environmental law. So the law school is very much focused on human rights as well as other areas, but in the context of the talk tonight, I think that's important to stress. So the commitment by the law school and its centres to supporting human rights, to speaking truth to power, is why we are so honoured to hold our annual Distinguished Lecture in conjunction with the Sheehy-Skeffington Distinguished Lecture Series. The purpose of the Sheehy-Skeffington Distinguished Lecture Series is to acknowledge the courage and persistence shown by Micheline Sheehy-Skeffington in speaking up to the injustice shown to women here at NUI Galway. It is very hard work to speak truth to power. It's even harder when that power consists of your friends, your colleagues, and your employer. So we'd like to thank Micheline for all her courage in that regard. In taking this case, Micheline and the 5 women that followed her, and I'm glad to see a number of them in the audience here today. I see Roisin, I see Adrian, and I think Margaret is here as well. They changed the face of Irish higher education sector, and we owe them a huge debt for that, and all of us have benefited from that change. So we in the School of Law and the University's Women's Network want to allow this university to continue to benefit from Micheline's legacy. To this end, the lecture series will celebrate people who have shown courage, who have stood out and called out injustice, and have stood their ground in the face of adversity. And it is in light of that it is particularly apt that Justice Theron is speaking today. So from that I'd like to just introduce, if I could, Justice Theron. From very humble beginnings, Justice Theron has risen to the highest court in the Republic of South Africa. She was born during the apartheid regime in South Africa, began her life in a poor, segregated township in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. She studied law at Natal University there, and she was awarded a Fulbright scholarship where she went to study her Master's in Law in Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and subsequently worked for the International Labour Organization in Washington. In addition, Justice Theron, when she returned to South Africa, she worked initially as an advocate, as well as working in the University of Natal. But in October 1999, she was appointed to the High Court, and she, at that time, was the youngest judge in South Africa and the first black female judge to be appointed in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. After serving as a High Court judge for 11 years, she was then appointed as a judge to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and in 2017, she was appointed to the Constitutional Court of the Republic of South Africa. Her personal journey is incredibly inspirational, but that's not why we have Justice Theron here today. We have Justice Theron here today because as a judge, she is incredibly inspirational. And she has known for leading a number of judgments, and in particular for her defence of women's rights. So just to give a flavour of her judgments, and it is just a very brief flavour of her judgments, she's been on a court that rendered unconstitutional statutory provisions that she held discrimination against married women in the case of Gumaid to her, and she provided an incredible dissent in a case where the sentence of a convicted rapist was being reduced, and she provided a dissent in the Nkomo case where she stressed the necessity that the courts send a clear message to their communities that they are determined to protect the equality and the dignity and the freedom of all women. More recently, in the groundbreaking judgment on racism in the workplace, Justice Theron wrote a unanimous judgment on behalf of the Constitutional Court in the Rustenburg case, and her judgment sets a precedent for the proper approach to sanctioning racist remarks in the workplace. And the words of the former Chief Justice of Ireland, Justice Susan Denham, come to mind when I was looking at Justice Theron's biography. She stated in the case of MD versus Ireland that equality was one of the highest and noblest aspirations to be included within the Constitution of modern states. The South African Constitution, unlike the Irish Constitution, is renowned for its incredible jurisprudence in this area. Therefore, we're all in for a treat, I think, tonight, because we're going to learn more about that jurisprudence from a member of the Constitutional Court of South Africa. It is with great pleasure that I hand the floor to Justice Theron, who's going to speak to a talk called Are We All Equal? Is the New South Africa's Promise of True Equality a Reality or Still a Dream? Justice Theron.
Thank you, Siobhan, for that incredibly warm welcome, and to Dr. Charles as well, and all the practitioners and the people from the academics that I was together with earlier on. They've warmed me up, so I'm ready now. I'm just not quite sure how the PowerPoint works, and to oh, there we go, I figured it out. Even judges know these things, eh? So we have a saying in South Africa, it says all protocol observed, but you only say that when somebody has already been through all the list of welcoming people. So we haven't done that. So will you allow me, in the absence of that, to say all protocol observed, and everybody is most welcome here. And I want to start off by saying thank you to the organizers, and especially to the good doctor here. Please give her a round of support, of applause. She's the reason that y'all are stuck with me tonight. I'm glad, and I hope by the end of the evening that you'll be a little bit happy about it too, about her choice. It's my first visit to Ireland, and my clock, Daniel, please will you stand up, Daniel? So, we've traveled together. We've spoken about Ireland and about the people, and you know, we feel an affinity for Ireland in some way, and I think it goes back to our history, and in a sense, the Irish people, which I understand is also made up of people that come from everywhere, immigrants and migrants. So you can feel like outsiders in the big world. And in South Africa, especially black people, we felt like outsiders for so long in our own country, where we were just there to provide a service and to do what may have advanced the interests of the minority rather than your own interests and your family's interest. And I know that in the struggle against apartheid, the Irish community was very active. In various ways, in demonstrations, in boycotts, and those kind of invisible ties will always be there. And I think it's good for us to remember them and to recall them, because the world is a big place, but it's also a small community in a way, and we need each other. We are not islands. And I think in South Africa, we saw that. The pressure, it was really the international boycotts and the pressure from outside, together with the assistance that was given to the African National Congress, that helped us to overcome that horrible system of apartheid. And that is why, even in the international community, up to today and going forward, we need each other. We need those ties, and we need to make those ties stronger. Because where there is an injustice, sometimes people in their own country cannot fight alone, but you need the support of the rest of the world to stand together with you. So I know it's been done before, but I think on behalf of South African people today, again, we say thank you. We say thank you, and I look at the room and most of the young people here, so maybe you personally may not have been involved, but you have people, you have family, you have those who've gone before you who were involved in that struggle. And I bring with me heartfelt thanks and appreciation for the role that the Irish people played. And one South African that stands out is Kader Asmal. That he was a distinguished lecturer in Dublin, and he came back to South Africa. He was our Minister of Water, and he was a very fiery man. And water and sanitation, I don't think it's that sexy a ministry. but with him as the minister, water and sanitation was at the forefront. He made water and sanitation, he made us realize how important it is and what a basic right it is, that it's a human right. And really, everywhere, everybody will know that Kader Asmal was Minister of Water and Sanitation. They might not know who the minister is today, but they knew then that Kader Asmal was the minister. And for a while, he was the Deputy Minister of the Deputy Minister of Justice as well. So I got to interact with him quite regularly. As Dr. Siobhan said, I think in South Africa we all have stories to tell. And I have a story to tell as well, and maybe if there's time, I'll share a bit with you about my story, my personal journey from a very, very poor community, which would be referred to as a township, to the highest court in the land in South Africa. It may not surprise you to know, I'm supposed to do this as well, eh? It may not surprise you to know that equality was an ideal for which the late, great Mr. Mandela was prepared to die. At his trial that resulted in him being imprisoned on Robben Island, he said, in mitigation of sentence, he said, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to see realized. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." I pause for a moment to ask you tonight, is there an ideal for which you would be prepared to die? Is that a question that you've ever asked yourself? Maybe it would be good for us to think about what's important to us. And is there something that we would be prepared to die for? Is it injustice? Is it poverty? Is it those migrants who put their lives at risk, seeking some sort of freedom and equality? What is it? Or do we just continue in our own lane, happily going along, we're comfortable, so we don't need to put ourselves out of our comfort zone? But if we all do just a little bit, I think we can make this world so much better place. What I take from Mr. Mandela, that it is not enough just to be free and to be equal. Each one of us needs to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom and equality of other people. My focus this evening is on equality. Yes, we are all equal in South Africa. We all have the right to vote. The Constitution has abolished all forms of discrimination. The Constitution dictates that we all must be treated the same with equal access to opportunities. And this is the question. Are we able to enjoy and give effect and content to our right to equality? And this is the question that I want to explore this evening. I want to mention first briefly the value that we, as the Constitutional Court, have found in Irish jurisprudence. There's been a number of occasions when we have looked to Irish law for guidance. We have a section in our Constitution that says that we can consider foreign law when interpreting the Bill of Rights. So we have the power to look at foreign law when trying to give content to South African law. In a landmark case in which we found that laws that were aimed at prohibiting sexual intimacy between gay men violate the right to equality in that they unfairly discriminated against gay men on the basis of sexual orientation, we noted in the judgment that sodomy in private between consenting adults had already been decriminalized in Ireland. In deciding that the proper protection of entrenched fundamental rights requires a public law remedy, We also had regard to the legal position in Ireland, where constitutional public law remedies have been granted in the absence of any express constitutional remedial provision. More recently, in relation to the consideration of Irish law, we were faced with the question of whether the National Societies for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals had the requisite power to institute private prosecutions for offences of animal cruelty. In finding that it did, we recognize that the earliest recorded law against animal cruelty dates back to 1635 in Ireland. And I believe the person who started the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals was from Ireland. The act that we look to, ploughing by the tail and pulling by the living wool of sheep in 1635, prohibited the use of horses' tails to control them, and further prohibited the pulling of wool from sheep while they were still alive. Some of our judgments have also recognized the stark differences that exist between Irish and South African law. In finding that the South African president's powers to pardon criminals are subject to judicial review, we noted the judgment by Finlay P. in State versus Murphy that the president in Ireland is not answerable to the national parliament or to any court for the exercise of his or her powers and functions with regard to both formal and discretionary powers. We didn't quite follow Ireland in that one. I do hope that the ties between South Africa and Ireland will be strengthened after my visit in some small way. And it will help us to remember the past, but it will also encourage us to look forward, especially to those like Grace. I don't know your Gaelic name, but who wants to come and visit us in South Africa. So it's about people and it's about relationships. And it's about us taking that opportunity to build upon the relationships. So you all know I'll be publicly extended an invitation. We welcome guests to our court. You know, our court, it's landmark, not just in being the court that it is and the kind of law it dispenses, but also where it's situated. From the day I was appointed to that court, I love going to work every day. The court is built on the site of an old prison. Both Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi at some stage was imprisoned there. And this is evident in all of our history, because of where we come from, we've gone completely the opposite end. So our court is one of the most transparent buildings. Part of our courtroom is glass. And when you're sitting on the bench and you look out, you see people walking past. But the glass is in such a way that you only see a portion of their legs. But that is deliberate, because you cannot tell if they're blue, if they're black, if they're white, or if they're green. Those are just the people, and those are the people that must be able to look in through the glass to watch justice being dispensed, that it's not behind closed doors, and that we as judges, the decisions we make impact those people. Doesn't matter who they are, it's just the people that they impact. And that's just one of the symbolisms of our building. So I'm a bit of a storyteller, so I go off at tangents also. But the point I wanted to make is that I love going to work. Every day, I love what the court is. I love what it stands for. So when you come and visit, you will see that. So, and because we are so proud of our court, we're so proud of our heritage, and particularly our new heritage, we love having visitors We welcome visitors to our court. I don't know about any other Supreme Courts, but you'll find judges who, before a hearing, will meet with a group of people just for 5 minutes or for 10 minutes. They'll meet with school children. They'll meet with dignitaries. They'll meet with legal professional people. But if they are available, the judges of our court will meet with you. And we, in fact, have a special program where every year we take between 15 to 20 foreign clerks to come and work at our court. So hopefully after this visit, we will receive, and I think Daniel's going to talk a bit more about that in his lecture on Monday to the students. We'll receive a few more applications from foreign law students. So we particularly look at students who already have a law degree or are in their final year, but what works best for us is students who already have a law degree. In order to understand the Constitutional Court's approach to equality, we have to understand our background and understand South Africa's background, because our approach is particularly influenced by our history. And while I think we have one of the most progressive constitutions in the world, because we believe we have taken, being one of the last democracies, one of the last constitutions to be drafted, we believe we have taken the best from all parts of the world to formulate our own constitution. But it's also important that our constitution recognizes our past. And you'll see our judgments also recognize our past. And one of the decisions that Dr. Siobhan referred to, the one that I wrote about racism, we said in the South African context, where you use certain words, we cannot just look at the ordinary meaning or dictionary meaning of those words. We have to look at those words in the South African context, because they may have a very different meaning in South Africa as opposed to outside of South Africa. So we've taken from the best of the world and made it homegrown. Now, you must also have regard to the fact that we had a history of apartheid. So in addition to all the other inequalities, everything was based in apartheid. And it's in this context that the Constitutional Court interpreted equality. So the inequality that existed in South Africa is rooted in military context, conquest, in political exclusions, in colonialism. Following the establishment of Cape Town by the Dutch in the 1650s, there was gradual colonial expansion into the interior of South Africa by both the Dutch and British colonialism. And then we had something called the migrant labor system. I don't know if I've gone past. No? Yeah? Okay, migrant labor system. What the system did is that the people in power realized they needed workers, but they didn't want these workers to be part of the community. So they established homelands or settlements outside of the Union of South Africa. And they brought people from outside to come and work in the Union. But those people that came to work, and now this is all in one country, but we had migrant workers in our own country. So people would leave their homelands, their families to come and work, and mainly in the gold mines, and be at the mines for months and months and months on end, and perhaps go home once a year. And that's when they see their families. And in the towns where they worked, they were not integrated as part of those towns. They were given separate areas where they lived in hostels. And these were grown men with families, with children, that was treated almost like slaves. And we still feel the effects, the devastating effects of that migrant labor system in South Africa today. And I'm sure it will be many, many years before those effects are washed away. And we had legislation which enforced inequality. The Native Land Act. This act apportioned 13% of the land to black people. And yet this was 80% of the population. But 80% of the population occupied 30% of the land, and 20% of the population owned and occupied 80% of the land. And if you follow South African history, you will know, if you follow what is happening in South Africa at the moment, the land question is one of the burning issues that is facing our country. And I'm digressing from my paper now, but it was a settlement that was reached between 1990 and 1994. The settlement which some people still criticize the ANC for, that there was no full control taken over the land. And so gradually over time, we've tried to address the issue, but we are falling far short. In a recent case that we had at the Constitutional Court, and this involved giving people land back which their forefathers had been evicted from. And I forget the statistics, but it said if the department processed all those applications diligently, it would take them something like 30 years, at least, maybe even more, to deal with that. And we are already 25 years into democracy. In 1994, I think every South African thought that now it's going to be the land of milk and honey. It's the promised new order, but it wasn't quite like that. We had significant improvements, yes. We've made significant strides, yes. But the ideal that Mr. Mandela said that he would die for, that ideal has not yet been achieved. The new government, the 1994 government, invested in education, in health, social services, and it really has played a huge role in reducing poverty. It introduced social grants for the first time, and close to 2.3 million people escaped poverty between 2006 and 2015, largely because of social assistance received from the government. We must also note that during the drafting of our interim constitution, South Africa was on the brink of a civil war. And if we had not come out with that constitution, I don't think we even want to think of what the consequences may have been. And that is why there may have been more giving and taking in order to come out with not a completely satisfactory settlement, but something that makes people happy, or something that would be workable. Brexit come to mind? You may have heard about the AWB. It's actually a big name there. Afrikaner Weerstandsbeweging, led by Eugene de Blanche. They were an Afrikaner right-wing movement, and they actually stormed the World Trade Center. And the World Trade Center was where the negotiations were taking place for the interim constitution. And when that happened, a lot of us thought it was the end. A lot of us thought that we were going to have civil war. but the negotiations continued. But there were losses. There were thousands and thousands of lives that were still lost in that process. "25 years after democracy, the levels of inequality remain stubbornly high in South Africa. Inequality has actually increased since the end of apartheid in 1994. South Africa remains a dual economy with one of the highest inequality rates in the world. High inequality is perpetuated by a legacy of exclusion and the nature of economic growth, which is not pro-poor and does not generate sufficient jobs. We have one of the highest levels of unemployment in the world. I think I read an article that said that during the Great Depression, unemployment was at 25%. Unemployment in South Africa is at 27%. And it's not even classified as a depression. The labor market is characterized by several challenges, including, as I mentioned, the high level of unemployment. And racial and gender disparities are still predominant. Race, unfortunately, still affects the ability to find a job. And although there are an increased number of women that participate in South Africa's economy, females find it harder to find a job, and they earn less than their male counterparts. Now, this reality that we have in South Africa stands in stark contrast to the prominent place in our Constitution of a set of fundamental values and rights of direct relevance to the achievement of a more egalitarian society. Why is this? Perhaps because of the transformative nature of South Africa, or what we call South Africa's constitutional project. Transformative constitutionalism has been described as a long-term project of constitutional enactment, interpretation, and enforcement to transforming a country's political, social institutions and power relations in a democratic, participatory, and egalitarian direction. It connotes an enterprise of inducing large-scale social change through non-violent political processes grounded in law. Just by saying that, I realize how enormous that task is, especially in a country like South Africa, where the majority of people might feel that, in fact, the revolution is over. We have democracy, that change has come. So what are we still fighting for? But I hope that that only applies to a small section of our population, those who are in that lane where they are comfortable. But if we must just look over our shoulders, we must look at the next lane, even in South Africa, especially in South Africa, at the poverty, the inequality that still exists. And we need another revolution. Of course, a non-violent revolution. A revolution that's going to bring about social justice. That's what we're looking at now, is social justice. I think the Constitutional Court plays such an important role in regards to socio-economic rights. And that's where it has had so much, it has profound effect. Section 9 of the Constitution enshrines the right to equality and prohibits unfair discrimination by the state and private persons in all contexts. The Constitution provides that everyone is equal before the law and has the right to equal protection and benefit of the law. Equality includes the full and equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms. In order to achieve equality, the Constitution empowers the government to undertake legislative and other measures which are designed to protect or advance persons or categories of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. I'm going to make my paper available to Dr. Siobhan, so I'm going to skip some of it because I can see we are running out of time. What we are looking at in South Africa is substantive equality, not just equality that is written in the Constitution and in the law books, but substantive equality, the equality that changes people's lives, the equality that improves lives, the equality that gives people jobs, that gives people houses, that gives them decent education and a future. In order to achieve equality, the Constitution says we can differentiate between groups and between people. And this recognizes the disadvantage that some groups or some people come from, but it must not be unfair. You know, they say as a judge, there's always a lot of people that are not happy with you and your decisions. And if you look at the number of cases that judges do, say there's 2 parties in every case, at least one party is not going to be happy. And it's the same thing with law, with the law such as this. Not everybody's going to be happy with this law. There's people that's going to feel that it operates unfairly against them. Discrimination involves differentiation. You cannot discriminate on listed grounds. And these are the grounds. And as if those grounds are not enough, you also cannot discriminate on analogous grounds. So they might not be listed, but similar to the ones that are listed. So on paper, in our Constitution, we have almost, I would say, ultimate protection. But the problem is giving context to that. Now, I think this is where the Constitutional Court has really enjoyed huge impact in drawing those distinctions and the relationship between equality and socio-economic rights, and where the Constitutional Court has forced government to take certain actions and to stop other actions in promoting the right of equality. And what we have said is that there is actually a positive legal duty on the state to take reasonable measures to realize the standard of equality, the standard that gives substance to the right of equality. And you'll see, I've listed there, where the Constitutional Court has recognized the following factors as being indicators of unreasonable state conduct in giving effect to these rights: a failure by the government to take proper steps, a lack of provision within a government program for those desperately in need. And that was a principle that emerges from the HIV case that was brought by the Treatment Action Campaign, where the government said we were not in a position to make antiretroviral drugs, which are life-saving drugs to somebody who has been diagnosed with HIV, available to everybody. The Constitutional Court said, you have to do that. You have to find the means to do that. It's not good enough to say, right now, I don't have the money to do that. It's not within our policy. We've also called government to task where they have not engaged with beneficiaries of rights. That you will see more so in mining rights, where mining rights may have been granted to prospecting companies and to big companies, but the rights of the people occupying the land have not been taken into account, or they have not been consulted. And as I mentioned, the ideal to transform our society comes from the time when we were drafting our new constitutional order. The epilogue to the interim constitution provides that the constitution constitutes a historic bridge between the past of a deeply divided society characterized by strife, conflict, suffering, and injustice. So our interim constitution recognizes that that is where we come from. And it sees where we want to go to. We want to go to a future founded on the recognition of human rights, democracy, peaceful coexistence, and development opportunities for all South Africans, irrespective of color, race, class, belief, or sex. And as long as conditions of inequitable access to education, inequitable access to housing, food, water, healthcare, and electricity exist, our constitutional aspiration of substantive equality will have a hollow ring. The Constitution says that it's not sufficient for judges just to rely on the say-so of Parliament or on technical reading of legislation. Under a transformative constitution, judges bear the ultimate responsibility to justify judicial decisions, not only by reference to authority, but by reference to ideas and values. And although South Africa and our constitutional project are facing significant challenges, I take solace in the idea of former South African Chief Justice Langa, who's now late, that we must look that these obstacles must be looked as enabling conditions for transformation. And as long as there are obstacles, there must be a drive to overcome them and to create a society that is equal, to create a society that Mr. Mandela dreamed of. And I'll spend the last 5 minutes talking very briefly about my journey. I was born to a very poor community until the age of about 13 or 14. I thought all people in the world were brown. I thought that all people only dress up really on a Sunday when you're going to church and you wear decent shoes. But the rest of the time, it really didn't matter. My mother and my father didn't finish their education, not because they didn't have the ability to, but because in that time, when children became 15, 16, and were of school-leaving age, they had to go work in order to support the family. So I was the first person in my mother's family and in my father's family to have completed matric, to have completed school, grade 12. My mother was a cashier in a large department store. And from the age of 15, I worked in that department store every weekend, every school holiday, in order to assist and to buy whatever I needed. If I needed books, that's the money that I would use to buy books. When it was time for me to get my driver's license, that is how I got my driver's license, because I knew that whatever income my parents had was just enough for the family. And my father was working in construction. And there used to be lows and highs in the construction industry. And they never used to employ them permanently because when it suited them, the bosses, they would just let them go when there was a slump in the industry. So there were long periods that he was unemployed. And in the time when he was unemployed, he would take what we would call a grass slasher, but we didn't have too many lawn mowers, like a long instrument where you can cut grass. And he would walk from our little brown community to the neighboring white community to cut people's grass, to get some, even if it's a few rand, just for that day to put bread literally on the table. And my mother started making fudge. I see there's a lot of fudge here that's got whiskey in. I thought after the lecture I'd try some. And I worked with my mother in this little home industries at home. And eventually I pushed her out of the business and I took over the business because I thought it was quite lucrative. And I continued to sell fudge in addition to working at the supermarket because I developed a passion for music. I enjoy music. But, I mean, my parents would never think of paying for music lessons. So I used that money to pay for music lessons, as well as for my books. So from the age of 16, I've been working, and I haven't stopped working. And sometimes I feel that I work twice as hard as my male counterparts to get not even the recognition that they get, to get half of the recognition that they get. And what do? I don't complain, I just continue working. When I was 5 years old, my father enrolled me in school. At that time, there was one university for brown people like me, and it was in the Western Cape. It was a 14-hour drive from our home. And in that part of South Africa, the brown people predominantly spoke Afrikaans, which is the colonial language, and it was derived from a mixture of the local language and Dutch. And he decided when I was 5 that I would go to an Afrikaans school. I didn't know anything about Afrikaans, but at that time, he knew that I would go to university. And the only university I could go to, I said, was in the Western Cape. So he enrolled me in the one school that they had for brown people, the one Afrikaans-speaking school. I used to walk about 5 kilometers to school every day from the age of 5. So when I finished high school, I knew, well, when I was 5 already, my father told me that I'm going to university. So that's what I knew, I was going to university. I didn't know what a university was. I'd never seen a university, but I knew I was going there. And they had, in fact, altered my birth certificate. Supposed to have started school when I was 7, but my father said I just became too much at home. And they knew that I had some special talent. They didn't know what it was, but they just knew that I had to go to school when I was 5 and that I was ready to go to school. So I was 16 when I finished high school. And to take you back just to 2 years before I finished high school, I would say that's the time where I first became politically aware of the situation in South Africa through the student boycotts. And student leadership came to me and said, Leona, we know you're a bit bright, so we don't have black scientists in South Africa. And we think that when you go to university, because everybody knew I was going to university, that you must study science. So I said, okay, because now I also thought, now I'm going to change the world, starting with South Africa. I'll be one of the first black scientists. So my passion was always law. Somehow I always knew I wanted to study law. So I applied to the universities, and I applied to study law. The year I finished matric, that was the year the government introduced a new law. It was a quota system where white universities could take a quota, a certain number of black students as students into the university. So this meant I could go to my closest university and I didn't have to go to the one that was miles away. And I applied to do science as my first choice and law was my second choice, and they admitted me into the university. Now you must know, my parents had never been to university. I had never been. But they sent me to go and enroll the first day. And I went on my own. But the place where the university was situated was a white area. And there were only white buses that operate in that area. So I could only take public transport up to a certain point, because the rest of the buses were only for white people. So I had to walk another 5 or 6 kilometers to get to the university. And I got there and I started seeing signs of the university. But now I didn't know what I was looking for because I didn't know what a university was. And then I asked somebody, I said, no, I'm looking for the university. The person almost fell down laughing. He says, you're at the university. I didn't know what I expected, but I didn't know that a university is made up of lots of buildings. And then I went to the administration. And of course, in the administration, there were only white staff, and mainly senior, very old white ladies who'd been working there for years and years. Never had to deal with black people or brown people before. And I didn't go with any documentation or any letter of acceptance or anything. I mean, I was 16 years old, never heard of it, never knew what a university was. And they gave me the runaround. And I said to them, you know, I've applied for science, and they said, no, I must go back. They got no proof that I had applied for to be admitted. But I actually I think with age, some of us get better. I didn't look as good those years, so I think maybe they just thought, oh, this little pickaninny that really doesn't belong here. I went back, and fortunately, my parents had kept the acceptance letter. The next day, we went through the whole procedure again. Then they realized it was their error. They had accepted me into science, but my papers were in the law faculty. By the end of the second day, I was so tired of fighting with the system. And I was so glad to have found a place at the university. And then they said to me that the science faculty is somewhere else. I said, you know what? I'll just do law. And that's how I ended up doing law. You know, Maya Angelou says, you may write me down in history with your bitter lies, but still, like dust, I rise. I rise from a past that's rooted in pain. I rise from a past that's rooted in poverty. I rise from a past where domestic violence is rife. I rise from a past where I witnessed people being killed or seriously injured in weekend brawls. I rise from a past where my mother would fervently pray that it was not her son involved in that brawl. I rise from a past where the cries of women being beaten will haunt me forever. I rise from a past, an apartheid past, where police officers would raid our home. I rise from an undignified past, where my grandmother would be afraid to speak her mother tongue of Zulu, lest she lose her home and be separated from her brown children. I rise from an unjust past, where my father, on his way from work on a Friday, was locked up by white policemen because the work tools he was carrying was considered to be dangerous weapons. But still, I rise. I rise from a past where I was considered a lesser human being. I rise from a past where I was mocked for being a woman in a man's world. I rise from a past where fellow judges tried to humiliate me in court, but still I rise. On 8 May 1996, this was the day on which our new constitution was signed by the then Vice President of the country, Mr. Thabo Mbeki. And he, on that occasion, delivered a moving speech about what it meant to be African. And his speech was entitled, I am an African. Tonight I say, I am an African. And South Africa and Africa will rise. Africa will rise from the ashes. Africa will rise from corruption. Africa will raise leaders of integrity, where the rights of equality will be realized. And we will see the rainbow nation that Mr. Mandela was prepared to die for. Africa will rise. I thank you.